Hello there. Welcome to my review of the 2014 film The Cobbler, starring Adam Sandler. He plays Max Simkin. Melonie Diaz is Carmen Herrara. Steve Buscemi is Jimmy. And this film is directed by station agent director Tom McCarthy and written by McCarthy and Paul Sado. So, on to the spoiler-free review. Well, where do you start with this film? If you've watched the trailer, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a typical Adam Sandler high-concept, lowbrow, fart and casual racism film in the mould of Jack and Jill or Pixels. But it's not. If you've watched the first 5 minutes, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is Adam Sandler highbrow, dramatic, indie performance film like Punch Drunk Love or Spanglish. But it's not. What it is a horribly confused mess. The plot is nonsensical, overly complicated, and with a confused and confusing message. And a bizarre ending that might as well be aliens landing to take Sandler back to his home planet. It's that out of place. The concept has the potential to explore the idea of literally walking in another man's shoes to see how they experience the world by becoming that person when you put on their shoes, but quickly moves away from that in order to tell a story about the disturbing adventures of a cobbler and his magic shoes as he continues to get into trouble entirely of his own making and learns nothing by the end of the film. There's an attempt at humour, but it falls pretty flat, as it isn't subtle enough for a clever comedy and isn't broad enough for a dumb comedy. It doesn't lean in to any of the points it's trying to make, so in its attempt to say too much, it ends up saying nothing at all. It's dull, it's grim, it's short but it feels much longer, and I cannot recommend it to anyone looking for a good film to watch. Having said that, I would still recommend watching it, just to marvel at how bad it is. Watch it with friends, but only if you don't have to pay any money for it. It definitely falls into the category of nothing but the worst. So, onto the spoilers. The film begins with a prologue set in turn-of-the-century New York. A group of local Jewish businessmen meet in secret at a cobbler's shop. They are there to discuss a ruthless landlord who is driving up their rents, and they want the cobbler to do something about it. He says they are being too judgmental and you can't truly know a man unless you walk in their shoes. At which point, one of them presents him with a pair of the landlord's shoes. So they obviously know what he can do. And the presumption is he will become the landlord in order to somehow fix what is happening to them, as he must have done previously. It then cuts to the man cobbling his shoes on his cobbling machine when his 10-year-old son comes in and asks what he's doing. Now, if my dad was a cobbler and had a pair of shoes on a cobbling machine, I'd like to think that as a 10-year-old I'd have an idea. Thankfully, the boy is asking for us, the audience, rather than himself. He's exposition stupid rather than actually stupid. So the father explains that the cobbling machine was a gift from an angel for his father because of an act of kindness, and has the power to repair souls. This would be a cleverer line about whether it's repairing the soul of a shoe or your immortal soul if it wasn't for the fact that this prologue is in Yiddish and so it's subtitled, leaving no doubt that they are talking about the soles of shoes. Also, as we find out in the film, it doesn't repair the other type of soul either, as that would have been an interesting idea to explore. It feels a lot like this was a reshoot, as it's entirely unnecessary to the plot and simply explains something that is then explained again later in the film. Flash forward to present day and we meet Sandler's Max looking sad on a subway train, on his way to open his cobbler shop. A different shop from the prologue, so the shop hasn't been passed down the generations, just the job of being a cobbler. It's in a rundown part of New York that is in the process of being gentrified. Next door is the barber shop of Buscemi's Jimmy, who does a little bit of foreshadowing, Max is given a coat he wears for the rest of the film, so we know it's him when he's in other people's shoes. We meet his sexy model neighbour and her handsome boyfriend, who are the only people on the street who have been gentrified. Then Melonie Diaz's activist Carmen, who wants Max to sign a petition to stop the gentrification, but he's more interested in knowing how much his place might be worth. It's worth saying at this point that Carmen is the love interest, but she disappears for most of the film, so you'd be forgiven for completely forgetting who she is. She gives a setup for the climax of the film and then leaves. We then cut to the end of the day and Max goes home to his mother, who seems to have dementia. Then it's on to the next day. Method Man's Leon shows up at the Cobbler's and he's unpleasant and demands his shoes are repaired by the end of the day. This sets up Sandler having to use the magic cobbling machine, as his machine breaks and can't be repaired until later. Leon then doesn't show up for some reason, and so Max tries on his shoes for some other reason. He becomes Leon and naturally freaks out. He quickly works out it's because of the magic cobbling machine, so we montage our way through him trying on different shoes and becoming different people. I'll give them some credit for not having one of the characters being Rob Schneider delivering his hilarious "you can do it" line, and when he puts on the trans woman shoes, it's not horribly offensive. But I imagine Sandler was probably secretly quite disappointed that it wasn't more offensive. After this montage, we get another montage of him talking to new customers in his shop and taking their shoes. And then he goes on to commit various non-violent crimes. I think this is to show that he is having fun with this new power, which would traditionally lead to him realizing the error of his ways and using his powers for good, but that doesn't happen for a long while yet. Instead, we get the first of many attempts to do one thing but actually do something much worse, as he goes home to his mother and discovers that what she really wants is one more dinner with his absent father, who left them both many years ago. We know by now what this is setting up, but he doesn't do it right away, which to me would have made more sense if they'd introduced it earlier in the film, before he found the machine. The next thing he does, instead of having dinner with his mother, as his father, is use his sexy neighbour's boyfriend's shoes to become him and try to pick up girls, which fails because he lives with his mother. So he goes to the home of the sexy neighbour and attempts to sexually assault her disguised as her boyfriend, but can't because he would have to take off his shoes. This is where the Max character becomes completely irredeemable, as although he doesn't go through with it, it's not because of the moral implications of raping his neighbour, it's because he can't take off his shoes. It's no different from him being stopped by the police while attempting rape. It also neither informs the plot or motivates the character to reflect on what he's become, because this is quickly forgotten about. After this, the next scene is him pretending to be his father, played by Dustin Hoffman. He has dinner with his mother, and then she dies the next day. I know what they were trying to do here. They're trying to show that he cares for his mother and he's trying to use his power to do something good, while also setting up the return of the father character. But it just comes off as so creepy and cruel. And as they haven't set up that she is dying, it suggests that his actions directly killed her. No time to focus on that too much though, because Leon returns and is unpleasant again. So Max follows him home in a variety of shoe disguises and finds out he's a dangerous, violent thug, so he decides to rob him. I think in order to pay for a memorial for his mother, but considering he can become anyone, there are probably easier ways of doing this. He already stole a car to go for a joyride, so it's not as if he's against robbing people who aren't nasty to him. He finds Leon's stash of weapons, including a taser, and accidentally tases himself. When he wakes up, he is confronted by Leon. They fight, Leon gets tasered, and Max ties him up. Through a set of convenient circumstances, he has to continue to pretend to be Leon so he can get his hands on Leon's $50,000. As a result, he lets a snitch his gang were going to kill go free and has a meeting with evil property developer Elaine, played by Ellen Barkin. And now the story wanders off in a completely different direction that slowly crumbles under any sort of scrutiny. You see, up until now, Max has been picking shoes that happen to fit him and becoming whoever those shoes belong to. But the plot from here on only works because every character he needs to be happens to have exactly the same shoe size as him. It's also a wildly unwarranted escalation from a schlub cobbler, bored with his life, who discovers magic shoes that allow him to become someone else, literally and figuratively, that should mean he learns something about himself, to being involved in organised crime, amongst all the other subplots. And this is now the main story. Max takes the money and returns to Leon's house for absolutely no reason. Leon has got free and been waiting for Max, who he fights with again, and Max accidentally stabs him in the neck with the heel of the trans woman's shoe. Max runs away, turns himself into the police, so we know that he has a line, not raping women, but accidentally killing a dangerous criminal. The police take him back to the crime scene, which I'm sure is the procedure when somebody confesses to a murder, and the apartment has been completely cleaned up, so they let him go. There and then. Again, I'm sure that's entirely in line with police procedure. He goes back to the shop where the money and shoes he left at Leon's are waiting for him, and Jimmy makes it abundantly clear he was the one who cleaned up, without actually just flat out saying it. Max tries to return the money to Elaine, as Leon, but she has him knocked out and put in her henchman's car, so he can overhear the details of her evil scheme before they kill him. Which ties back into Carmen, the activist, who I think at this point we've had a total of 2 scenes with. Max escapes, and with the help of Carmen, who asks absolutely no questions, and the fact that every character from here on out has exactly the same shoe size as Max needs, he manages to bring down Elaine and her evil scheme, which has evolved from scaring a man out of his home into setting him and his house on fire. He ends up with the girl, and it seems the story is over. Except it's not. In the epilogue, he has to pretend to be Leon again, for plot reasons, and is captured by the snitch that he initially let go. Before the snitch can kill him, a car crashes into theirs, and Max is rescued by Jimmy the barber, who it turns out was his dad all along, who has remained silent throughout all this, despite his son nearly getting killed several times. The reason he's chosen to reveal himself at this time is because he's decided to tell his son that they come from a long line of Cobbler superheroes, with their own Cobbler cave, filled with hundreds of shoes from throughout history, which are completely useless, as it's already been established that if you put on a pair of dead man's shoes, you look how they do at that time, not how they looked when they were alive. Max is then shown the Cobbler-mobile, complete with a chauffeur who must just stand there all day waiting for them, and they speed off into the night. I'm not sure if this was set up for an intended sequel where Max becomes a crime fighter, but the film is a huge flop and this stupid ending really doesn't help. Max has learned nothing apart from how to ask someone out by the end of the film, and so what comes before that ending is largely pointless. His dad could have told him when he was a kid, as his father's father did, and also his dad left him and his mother because he was hiding from someone, but then is apparently part of a network of hero cobblers with powers, resources and friends, it really feels like this epilogue is from a different film entirely. There are far too many montages in the film. The subplots make Sandler's character immensely unlikable and gives him such a bad redemptive arc, the second half just doesn't marry well with the first half. And the romantic subplot is paper thin. I would definitely not recommend this film to anyone, but saying that, would still suggest you watch it if you're curious to see a truly awful film. Thank you. Goodbye.